What do you make of what we've heard out of Washington overnight vis-a-vis the tariffs, the restrictions on tech, and we've also had reports about restricting visas as well for Chinese nationals? How do you read all of this?
Well, I read it as the U.S. administration trying to gather up as much leverage as possible going into this Saturday's set of talks. Of course, Secretary Ross is on his way over to Beijing this weekend. His team, his interagency team, is already here in Beijing. And so I do think after the last set of talks that took place just about 2 weeks ago in D.C., the vice premier came out of those talks very optimistic that the U.S. was solely focused on the size of the trade deficit with China, and that maybe a little checkbook diplomacy was going to be enough to placate the administration. Overnight, we heard from the White House that won't be enough. And in fact, the U.S. wants to move forward. It wants to put in place tariffs. It wants to put in place investment restrictions, as well as export controls that are going to punish China for bad behavior and protect our own economy.
Is it clear to you that the Trump administration has a defined strategy when it comes to this trade relationship?
I think that's been a challenge, really. I think different members of the Trump administration are certainly coming to the fore at different times. The president himself sets policy on China, but I think he himself is still, on the one hand, very focused on the size of the trade deficit, but has increasingly realized that getting tough on China means dealing with some of these underlying market-distorting practices that the Chinese government's been engaged in. And I want to give him credit for actually wanting to address some of those issues. However, tactically, it seems that he sometimes focuses on the trade deficit, sometimes allows the impression that he's willing to make a deal that won't be as holistic. But overnight, he said, no way, we're going to move forward and punish China for
bad behavior. Do you think Commerce Secretary Ross is going to come out with any tangible agreements, progress after this weekend?
Well, I do think Secretary Ross wants to make tangible agreements on increasing purchases by the Chinese of American goods and services. And so those talks have been continuing for quite some time.
And the Chinese have shown willingness to do that.
Absolutely. And I think Secretary Ross is also focused on that issue. But in addition to that, Secretary Ross is also concerned about national security considerations and Chinese behavior in the U.S. market that could hurt national security, and so putting in place some protections against ZTE bad behavior as well as against some Chinese imports.
And you see that as a longer-term clash between these two sides when it comes to national security, because you're seeing both presidents ramp up the focus on
I think that's security. Right. I think both President Xi and President Trump have made national security a core tenet of economic security policy making. That is really a change for us. I think in the United States, it's been an abrupt shift that we're focused on things like the 232 tariffs to protect domestic industry. But in China, over the past 5 years, we've really been seeing this government focus on more statist, mercantilist policies that really drive domestic innovation at the expense of foreign participation in the market. But when something like the ZTE fine comes out and actually puts the future of ZTE in jeopardy if the U.S. remedy 7-year ban on sales of any American components to ZTE, that would have put the company out of business. I think that says to President Xi, what I'm doing is right in putting national security at the heart of trying to build indigenous capabilities underpinning our economy.
What are your clients saying to you? Represent corporations, U.S. corporates that operate here in China. What are they telling you about the domestic environment here, how they're being impacted by this?
Well, we know from the American Chamber of Commerce that 75% of those polled feel that they're less welcome in China today than they were in the past. It is getting harder to be successful here. However, the size of this market means it is such an important part of our clients' global growth opportunities. And so they want to be here. They want the U.S. administration to push back on Chinese behavior that's closing out their opportunities in the market, but they definitely also do not want tariffs that are going to lead to ramifications for their business.
The odds are against this, but if we get a clean solution from the North Korea Summit, if it happens very quickly, what impact could that have?
I think it would be positive. I think President Trump himself, through tweet, has linked trade and security issues with North Korea in the past. If China helps the United States have a successful summit in Singapore on the 12th, as maybe it will happen, I do think that will lead to the president wanting to see a positive way forward for U.S.-China trade.